Hey guys, my name is Ryan Condron. I am the founder of Lumerin. Started with hashpower, AI, and it's the importance of decentralized data routing. In order for me to really understand where we're going to be 100 years from now, maybe if I rewind and look at 100 years in the past, and if I look for a technology that got going about 100 years ago, I landed on flight. If I went to you and I tried to explain to you what flight looked like 100 years in the future, and say this is 1924. Commercial airlines just started getting going. People really don't know a lot about airplanes at this point, but if I try to point 100 years in the future, there are going to be international airports, and a lot of people are going to literally spend their life flying around the world to go to these conferences to see people that they actually live 10 minutes away from. But if I told you that 100 years ago, that this is where the airplane was going to go, this is what the industry was going to look like, you probably would have thought I was absolutely crazy. And if I did the same thing with Bitcoin, hash power, and mining 100 years into the future, what was it going to look like? And how do we protect it? And how do we make sure that this network stays decentralized and not controlled by any single government, entity, or organization? BlackRock. So, how do we look ahead? So I do a lot of random reading, and I came across a guide put out by the US government of how to survive an anaconda attack. And you were in the rainforest of South America and you came across an anaconda. There is an actual US produced guide on how to survive. I don't know why I was reading this. It was probably like 2 a.m., couldn't fall asleep, and I'm just like researching random things. And I kid you not, these are the 5 steps on how to survive an anaconda attack. Step number 1 is you hold perfectly still. Step number 2, according to this guide, is it's going to start swallowing you, and you let it. So step number 2 is it will work its way up to your ankles, it will work its way up to your waist. Step number 3 is let the anaconda swallow you all the way up to your chest. This is the official government guide, by the way, of how to survive an anaconda attack. Let the anaconda swallow you all the way up to your chest. Step number 4 in surviving the attack, because at this point I'm thinking, you've already lost. You're not surviving this attack. Step number 4 was take your knife, plunge it directly upwards, and rip it up to your chest. It's like, now we're getting somewhere. Step number 4 was the step that I needed to know earlier. Step number 5, have a knife and make sure it's sharp. This was very typical government, wasn't it? Step number 5 was actually supposed to probably be step number 1, is if you're going to be out in the middle of the jungle, have a knife, make sure it's sharp, and then do these other first 4 steps. Because if you do the first 4 steps and you don't have the knife for step number 5 or step number 4, then you're done. Now, the reality is we're looking forward into an ecosystem that is very, very powerful. It has so much potential. This ecosystem of AI. And we can look forward 100 years from now, and we can see a lot of attack vectors. And a lot of those attack vectors all revolve around the same thing. It's control. It's controlling information. It's controlling access. And it all comes down to this idea of freedom. Well, if you've been in Bitcoin or crypto for any length of time, you know that this is very much part of the ethos of crypto, is freedom. Freedom of access, freedom of control, owning your own assets, owning your own identity, being able to do what you want with your stuff whenever you want to. No one needs to know about it. No one needs to tell you yes or no. These are ethoses of the crypto community, and now we're bringing and tying it into AI. Now, one more story for you. And this is actually getting into my slides. I'm gonna tell you about this guy named Brad. Brad was doing pretty good for himself. He had founded a company called Xcore, which is a commodities trading company. And they had done so well that they bought this awesome new building that was right in the old docks district of town. That was this up and coming neighborhood. They were right on the water. He renovated all this old warehouse. He moved this company in, and Brad was doing pretty good. Now, Brad was having a little bit rough of a week. Brad's company started to bring in a new trading software platform, and it was a pretty bumpy implementation. And this morning, Brad was not in the best mood, but he got a call from his secretary that was sitting in the wonderful atrium lobby with the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water, overlooking the city skyline. And the secretary told Brad, I need you to come into the lobby. You have a delivery. Now, Brad, being the high-powered commodities trader that he is, not in a very good mood, says, just deal with it and don't bother me. I'm sorry, sir. You kind of needed to come into the lobby for this one. Brad doesn't know what's going on. He exits his office. He walks across the beautifully renovated warehouse space. He walks into the lobby with the floor-to-ceiling windows, and this is when he notices 2 things. The first thing he notices is just outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, he notices a very large shipping barge. The second thing he notices is a very strange man sitting in the lobby that looks a little messy. You must be Brad, he says. Yes, I am. What can I do for you? Well, you are Brad of Dock 54. At Xcore, right? Yeah, what can I do for you? Well, I've got your 50,000 pounds of black gold, good old-fashioned coal. Now, at this moment, Brad realized he had made a serious mistake. When the back office guy had called him the previous week saying that there was an issue with the system. Brad didn't take the time to listen and told him just to push the order through. What he did not realize was he actually took delivery of the commodity they were actively trading, which was 50,000 pounds of coal. Now, if you look over the internet, you will find lots of stories like this, whether it be a secretary that accidentally took delivery of several truckloads of pork loin, or some novice trader that accidentally took several deliveries of barrels of oil to an office in Manhattan. Whether they're true or not, they all serve the same purpose. It's underscoring the extreme disconnect between a market and the actual commodity that's being traded on the market. Now, why do I tell you all these stories between anacondas and coal traders and airplanes? It all came down to this idea of how do we keep a system decentralized and compensated and safe and control resistant and censorship resistant. It all came down to these different concepts that brought me to the idea of Lumerin. Lumerin was an idea for a decentralized data routing pattern. This idea that if we can keep the routing peer-to-peer, on-chain, decentralized, and keep the access to that data decentralized and anonymous, then we can essentially secure almost any type of decentralized system, regardless of where the compute is residing. So distributed and decentralized, two very different things. Where the miners are at for the Bitcoin network. If we can decentralize the control of the compute, if we can decentralize the control of the hash power, then we can keep a system decentralized. If we pair that with a marketplace that incentivizes people to keep the control decentralized, it's a flywheel that keeps going. So this is what it looks like with Lumerin. I couldn't find a good representation of hash power, so I just chose a dinosaur because it's my presentation. Why not? So what this looks like is you have a seller and a buyer. They're both running a Lumerin node. So if a seller happens to be a Bitcoin miner in the middle of Texas that has 100,000 devices, that can be one person owning 100,000 devices that point all 100,000 devices to a single mining pool or a single network, and they get to decide what they do with that large amount of hash power. Or they could run a Lumerin node. They could point all their devices through this proxy node that defaults to their default mining pool, and then they can put that hash power up for sale on a decentralized marketplace. If anyone, the buyer here, posts an order to buy some of that hash power, what happens instantaneously is that hash power is routed from the seller to the buyer peer-to-peer. This is completely anonymous, completely trustless, completely decentralized, and we are delivering a real-time commodity from seller to buyer. Now, the buyer gets to do whatever they want with the hash rate. They could point it into the ground, they could mine against a no-name pool, they could mine directly against the Bitcoin network, but it's their choice what they do with the commodity. No longer do they have to worry about taking delivery of 50,000 pounds of coal or a commodity. They can take instant delivery of the hash power in any amount completely anonymously. So next slide. So how this ends up working is exactly how I described it, where the little dinosaurs go from the seller to the buyer. Buyer then takes their dinosaurs, submits it to a pool. Pool mines on the Bitcoin network and pays the Bitcoin back to the buyer. The buyer is submitting everything on chain, and the payment flows in escrow through smart contracts. So this was the original model for Lumerin. This idea is how do we keep Bitcoin decentralized from a control aspect 100 years from now? And the idea was, well, if we incentivize it through a decentralized marketplace and decentralize the control of hash power, we can keep the system propagating. Now enter Morpheus. I started talking to David Johnston about 5 or 6 months ago now, and started hearing about what he wanted to build with Morpheus. This idea of these decentralized smart agents. This vision of having an agent where I could go to an AI model, I could say, here's $10,000. I want you to make me as much money as possible with this $10,000 over the next 7 days, and then report back to me. And this AI model had all the access it needed to all these different networks and all the information it needed to be able to jump between different DeFi protocols, different networks, different systems in order to take that $10,000 to give me the highest yield possible. This is amazing automation. And better yet, if I wanted to pull up my phone and I wanted to use AI for something else that maybe wasn't necessarily DeFi related, but what if I wanted to tell my phone, hello phone, I want to watch a feature-length film with Matthew McConaughey and Sarah Jessica Parker about pirates in Siberia tonight. So my AI agent is going to be like, well, let's make a movie. It's going to need to connect to an LLM model that's going to write me a script. It's going to take that script and it's going to take it over to an audio generation LLM model that's going to then generate a full soundtrack and audio track based on my actors, based on their voices and sound effects of the movie and everything. It's going to then take the audio and the script and move it over to a high resolution video generator, and it's going to start generating my movie with the soundtrack overlay, and it's going to stream back to my phone. And by the way, all of these steps with these different generations are going to be compensated in real time on chain by my agent for me. It's a really cool vision. How do we achieve it? Well, we need a lot of really smart systems that are interconnected that can talk to each other, and an AI model can almost crawl across. The way I would liken it is we're building the web of interconnectivity for these different systems that the AI agent Spider can crawl across. And when I started talking to David more about this idea of, okay, we have peer-to-peer prompt and inference flow, and it's all going to happen through these on-chain smart contract ecosystem, the model started looking very, very similar to what we had already built with Lumerin for the decentralized hashpower marketplace. And that's what brought Lumerin and Morpheus together. Once again, my presentation, I get to pick what I want. I chose Neo for AI compute, because dinosaurs were already taken. So essentially what this looks like is very similar. You have a seller, which would be a provider of AI compute. You have a buyer of AI compute, and then it is streaming through a smart contract ecosystem. A highly technical diagram here. If you want more details, it is all written in a 26-page paper in the Morpheus repo that goes into all the details of the protocol, the back and forth. I'm going to close out with one last story. Why does any of this matter? The reality is 100 years from now, pretty much everyone in this room is going to be dead. If you're not dead 100 years from now, I'm going to be highly suspect. But then again, I'm not going to be around to be suspect anyways. But 100 years from now, I most likely will not even be a picture on somebody's wall. Chances are my kids might remember my name, but they're going to trade around some stories, and that's about it. If I write a book, it might last a little bit longer. If the book was really popular, it might last maybe 3 generations, 4 generations. But I'm going to have a pretty sharp drop-off. And I'm only on this earth if I'm really, really lucky, 70, 80 years. Unfortunately, tall people don't live very long, so maybe 60 years? I don't know. But at the end of the day, what's important to me? What can I do on this earth in this time that's going to last? Well, I came across this guy named John Dunlap, and I thought this was really interesting. See, John Dunlap was given a document, and he was tasked with making copies of this really important document. And John Dunlap took this document, and he made 200 copies. And I know that at one point in his life, he probably never thought he was going to be this person to do this, because he grew up in Ireland, he moved to Philadelphia, he was a printer. He was given this document, he made 200 copies of this document, and he distributed it. Now, to this day, only 26 copies of that document actually exist. And you ask me, Ryan, why do only 26 copies of that document exist? I'm glad you asked. It's because he made 200 copies of that document about 250 years ago. And if we did not have those 26 copies of the Dunlap broadsides, as they're called, we would have no certifiable evidence of the authenticity of a document called the Declaration of Independence. We would have no evidence that the Declaration of Independence had not been tampered with, had not been altered, was a forgery. But because we have 26 copies, we have evidence of its authenticity. This is data duplication. This is why blockchain is so important. This is why having access to decentralized AI models is so important. Because if you have a single source of truth that is gatekept or censored by a very large government or organization or entity, then you have no verifiable evidence. History can change, facts can change, truth is relative as time goes on. But if I can do something on this earth while I'm alive, whether I'm remembered for it or not does not matter. But if I can do something for my kids or my kids' kids, what's important to me is the access to truth, the access to data. I don't want any single government entity or organization to ever take that away from them. So I'm going to make damn sure that my kids have a knife, and when that government or entity or organization tries to swallow them, they can rip it up to their chest and free themselves. This is why I'm building Lumerin. This is why we're building Morpheus. And thank you for listening, guys.